Hi guys, one of my favourite videos to film every year is my favourite books of that year so far that I film in the middle of the year. I love seeing how much it changes by the end of the year. Often it does. Often the same books don't feature on my end of year favourites list, but I still like to watch back and see how it's changed, if any have remained the same. And actually I have a really good feeling about all the books that I have loved so far this year. There are some really good ones and a very wide range of books too. So let's just get into it. I will show you what I've loved reading so far this year the most. Like last year, it's not going to be in any particular order. I think last year actually I did a countdown of my least favourite to my most favourite. But actually I've loved all of these equally, which is really nice. And I've enjoyed reading a range of different genres. So let's get into it. The first book I have to show you I think is my favourite of the year. This is my definitive book that I have loved the most. I read it a few weeks ago and I can't stop thinking about it and wanting to reread it. I am head over heels in love with it, and it is When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon. In my April reading wrap up I think I described this as for fans of Stephanie Perkins, but I think this book is even better than Stephanie Perkins's books, which I didn't think was ever possible because I love her contemporaries, but this has got something really special about it. It is about a girl called Dimple who is into coding and program designing, and she's going to go to college in the autumn or the fall if you're in the US. But before that there is a coding summer course that she wants to attend, and her parents agree to it and she's not really sure why. She thought they would say no straight away. But the rest of the book is told from the perspective of Rishi, whose parents have set him up with Dimple in an arranged marriage. But Dimple has absolutely no clue that this is going on. They meet and what happens is that she ends up throwing her drink all over him, and then the book really starts from there. It's really interesting to read about characters like this who aren't like me. I find that's really good, and I think those kinds of things really help build empathy and understanding. But also I just think they should be published, and I'm really glad that this was picked up in the UK, and I think it's going to be a big hit. I think it's impossible not to love this book. It's so cute and sweet, and it's really nice to see a girl who's into coding, because I'm not into it myself because I think I was never encouraged, but I think this is the kind of book that maybe girls could see themselves represented in, and that is really important. It is definitely my favourite book of the year so far, and I really want another book from Sandhya Menon because I think she's insanely talented. Then there is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, which I read in January, right at the start of the year, but I can't stop thinking about this book either. A lot of these books I'm talking about actually occupy my brain a lot of the time. I can't stop thinking about any of them, but I think the best thing about Crooked Kingdom is that I don't like to include sequels on my favourites list. I kind of feel like it's cheating in a way, but I couldn't not include Crooked Kingdom because the characters mean so much to me, the story is really important and exciting, and it's a book that I want to encourage everybody to read. If you haven't read Six of Crows yet, you need to read that, and then you can read Crooked Kingdom, which is one of the best sequels I have ever read. It's also a duology, and so this is the last book, and I'm really enjoying reading duologies at the moment. I don't have to wait as long for one, and I'm quite bored of the usual trilogy format, so it's nice to read something a little bit different. For those of you who don't know what the Six of Crows duology is about, it's about a gang of misfits and thieves, and I think they're all teenagers in the book. It's a YA book anyway, but they go on a heist and they are promised a massive sum of money if they can complete this heist, but it's pretty much impossible. And the first book, Six of Crows, follows that heist, and then the second book, Crooked Kingdom, follows on after that happens and the repercussions of their quest. It features one of my favourite characters ever, Nina, and I love all the characters' strange friendships and relationships. I think it's great. I loved this as a sequel and I just want more. Leigh Bardugo, when are you going to write my Nina spin-off? Because I needed it yesterday. I need it now. I need that book in my life. Then I have The Outrun by Amy Liptrot, which is a book that I recently read, but it's not one I'm going to forget about in a hurry. This is an autobiographical book about the author Amy, who was born on the Orkney Isles, which if you don't know are just above Scotland in the UK, and it documents Amy's alcohol addiction as she comes to terms with that and goes through rehabilitation and moves back to Orkney, which she never thought she would do. It's all about nature and environment, but also it's a very personal story as well. well, and I liked how she balanced the personal story of it with the greater picture of her environment and the places she lived in and these amazing things that happen that sometimes we don't even realise is going on. So there are the northern lights in here, and the landscape of Orkney is quite wild and rugged, and I liked her comparisons between that and her addiction. And also I think it's really important with books like this that talk about addiction that you don't feel like when you've come to the end that is it. I think that's really important, that it's not glamorised in any way, and I think that Amy talks about it perfectly, and it was a very emotional read. It made me well up in quite a few places, but I think it's also really important, and I think it's one that you can't help but love. So I'd love to see more people on BookTube talk about this, because I do think it's a really important book, and I think it's one that you will really enjoy too. And it makes me want to go outside and experience the places that I live too, which I love doing, but sometimes you just need that reminder to do it, and I loved the Outrun. I'm really excited about this next book because it is by one of my favourite authors of all time. It is Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I love this book. It's actually my favourite thing ever. I really love Tess the D'Urbervilles, but I think that Far From the Madding Crowd is my favourite of Thomas Hardy's books so far, and to be honest I can see it remaining that way too because I loved it a lot. It is about Bathsheba Everdeen and her many suitors. She inherits a farm from her uncle, which puts her in quite a privileged position where she gets to run the farm. So for a Victorian novel you don't get to see many women in that kind of position, and I think Bathsheba is a really exciting female in terms of what else was being written about in Victorian literature at the time, because Hardy portrays her as she has so many suitors and in their eyes she is perfect, but she's also very flawed too. She makes a lot of mistakes, she's very hot-headed and rash, but I really loved her for that. And I love this book even more after watching the recent adaptation of it starring Carey Mulligan. I love it. It's pretty much my favourite adaptation of any book I've ever seen. I can't actually think of any other book to movie adaptation I've loved more. I thought it was absolutely fantastic and really true to the book, because this is the kind of book that so much goes on and there are lots of random stuff too that is relevant to the plot and the characters, but when you're adapting it, it might be quite hard to come across. But I think that the director did it really well, and also the screenplay was written by David Nichols, who wrote One Day and Us and so many other books, and I think he's fantastic. I haven't actually read any of his books, but he's adapted quite a few things, and he also adapted the BBC miniseries of Tess the D'Urbervilles, which I love. He does such a good job of the adaptations, and I really love this book. So I think I'm going to do a full video on it at some point. I've been promising that for a while, but I'm getting it all together and putting all my information together because I have a whole document of notes that I want to talk about on it. But I think also I'm going to use this, I think, for my A-level English Lit coursework. I'm not sure entirely yet, but I really want to talk about it a lot more, and I love it. It's pretty much my favourite book ever. Definitely in probably my top 10 all-time favourite books, which maybe I should do a video about because I think that would be interesting. And then the final book I want to talk to you about is Landmarks by Robert MacFarlane. So another nature writing book, which you can see I've been enjoying a lot of this year. I find it a really interesting genre. I like writing that kind of stuff as well, so I find it interesting to read books by authors that are doing a similar thing that I would want to do if I was to write a book, which I am writing a book, but I'd love to write some kind of nature writing book at some point in my life. This is an interesting one because it's not a straight prose narrative. I think the best way I can describe it is that it is a dictionary of words relating to nature from all over the British Isles. In fact, The Observer called it, "This joyous meditation on land and language is a love letter to the British Isles," and I completely agree. It made me fall in love with Britain so much more, and the landscape is so beautiful where we live. I think we really take it for granted. It made me really fall in love and appreciate it even more than I already did, which is why I like this kind of book. It really reminds you what is important, and I think with a lot of political and social upheaval going on, it's really important to get outside and just appreciate that everything else is still going on around you. Even if your life seems crazy, you can still go outside and the sun rises each day and the moon is going on a continuous cycle and the hedgerows are full of life, and sometimes you do need to remind yourself of that, and Landmarks was a book that really did make me appreciate that more. The way that Robert MacFarlane tells it is that there'll be a chapter on a book that another nature writer has written, for example The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd, and then he will talk about that book and what it says about the landscape and kind of like an analysis of it, but in a very subtle way. And then after that there'll be a glossary of terms from all over the British Isles with words that relate to that landscape that he's talked about. So there was The Living Mountain, that's one of the chapters. It talks about Nan Shepherd's books and he talks about his own experience with the landscape that she writes about, and then afterwards there is a glossary on mountain related words, for example, and it goes on like that for all different types of landscapes and environments. So I think there's one on rivers and waterways, and it's a really beautiful book. There were so many words, I had to get a little notebook and write some of my favourite ones down. And also you can see here I've dog-eared so many different pages that I want to remember. It's one of these books that I'm going to go back to again and again and again, just because I think you'll get something new out of it every single time, and I want to see lots more people reading it because I think it's a really interesting book. If you haven't read anything like this before, I think it would be quite a good place to start because it's got a lot of other recommendations for other books, and the way he writes as well is really beautiful. So I would highly recommend Landmarks. So those were my favourite books of 2017 so far. It seems like a range of books, but actually I've been sticking to quite a few genres this year. Nature writing, I've read a few classics, and actually there were only 2 YA books out of 5, so I think that's really interesting. I'm definitely veering away from that now. We'll see how this list turns out by the end of the year. I don't know, maybe I'll read some really standout books and none of them will be on here, but I can definitely see Far From the Madding Crowd being on there, and definitely When Dimple Met Rishi. In fact, I don't think this year it will change very much. Let me know in the comments some of your favourite books you have read so far this year. Do you think they'll remain on your list by the end of the year? I would love to know. So I will see you guys soon, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Happy reading!